program chair, Joel Goldstein, will introduce our speaker, Professor Stephen Brint.
Okay. The program committee always tries to come up with a interesting program for each meeting. I think some of the past ones have been very well received. Today, we're very pleased to have Stephen Brint, who's an American sociologist specializing in the study of organizations and education. He's Distinguished Professor of Sociology and Public Policy at the University of California, Riverside. His academic focus is on the comparative study of schooling systems around the world and the transformations of higher education, professionalism, and class politics in the United States. He's the author of over 100 articles and 6 books and has received many honors for his works. I note that in his bio he says that he is, among other things, working on an essay that will, quote, probably get me in good trouble on the fate of academic freedom in the contemporary university, unquote. I was intrigued by his March 2024 column in the Chronicle of Higher Education, which was subsequently referenced in the New York Times opinion column, where he considered the ramifications for higher education of a second, Donald Trump presidency, which is what he will address today. Welcome, Professor Brint.
Okay, thank you all, and thank Nancy Hensel for inviting me, and Joel and Marcia Goldstein for their hospitality and the warm introduction. Thank you. So, yeah, this is a scary title, I know. We're going to start by talking about changing public attitudes about higher education. Because indeed there is a big change in the public's attitude. Just out of curiosity, how many people went to college in this room, and how many people thought it was a good thing to do? All right, well, that's not any longer the view of everyone in this country. And as you can see, according to the Gallup poll, people who feel that have a lot of confidence, a great deal or quite a lot of confidence in higher education has dropped by 20 percentage points between 2015 and 2024. 57% had a high level of confidence in the earlier date and only 36% now. Typically, higher education has been an institution that a lot of people have high confidence in. Next to the military, it's been right at the top. That is not any longer true. And probably that is a surprise to many of you who had a wonderful time in college and thought it was a good investment and valuable to your lives. 2/3 of Americans now feel like higher education is going in the wrong direction. So, big change. This, I apologize, is a little hard to read, but if you look at the Republicans, and the green line is how many Republicans now feel a great deal of confidence in higher education. You can see it's only 20% now. Democrats have also gone down, and not as much. But they too have declined a bit. And so why is it? Why has there been this decline? Well, and you can imagine that the issue of political bias or alleged political bias in the classroom is a big thing for Republicans. They don't like some of the discussion of race and gender and critical race theory and so forth. And so that's among those who say they have low confidence in higher education, 41% cite that reason. Quality and focus of instruction, 37% who have low confidence cite that, and cost is the third factor. As I said, allegations of political bias in the classroom is a big thing for Republicans. Cost tends to be a bigger thing among Democrats. So when we're looking at the Republican policies having to do with higher education, they're they're built to some degree on changes in public opinion. Now, politicians have had a lot to do with that change in public opinion too. They've, in some cases, demagogued tremendously about things like political bias in the classroom. But they're using it as a springboard for policy changes that go way beyond public opinion. So I have a little slide here about how the complaints about higher education are exaggerated. Maybe there's a kernel of truth to them, but they're very exaggerated. All the studies that I have seen about what goes on in the classroom suggest that professors, the great majority of them, try to keep their politics out of the classroom. It is true that most professors are liberal, they're on the left, but they try to keep their views out of the classroom. But that has not stopped J.D. Vance from saying that professors and universities are the enemy because they're indoctrinating students. It's also true on the Democratic side that studies have shown that the vast majority of borrowers are able to pay back their loans, and moreover, they make close to $1 million over the course, on average, over the course of a lifetime, working lifetime, as compared to those who just have a high school degree. So the payoff for a college education is still extremely high, but the Democrats in some ways have also taken the bait and said, you know, there's too much debt and so on, and we need to remove student debt. I don't think that holds up all that well either, although there are some people who are in deep trouble as far as debt goes. So we're going to talk about the rest of the talk. I'm going to talk about the Republicans' ideas about higher education, how they're using this decline in public opinion about higher education for a vast onslaught of policy changes that they'd like to see put into place. And as you'll see, the main actors here are people in the think tanks, especially the Heritage Foundation. You've probably heard of Project 2025. There's also the Goldwater and the Manhattan Institute. Those are other actors in the think tank space. A bunch of Congress people are very interested in higher education, possibly led by the woman at the top here, Virginia Fox, but some of these other folks too. And then, of course, the presidency. Trump has some ideas. A lot of them are kind of crazy, but we'll talk about them too. Okay. Overall, the Congress people, even though I don't agree with much of what they say, they're a little more sane than the president, former president. Okay, let's talk about Chris Rufo. Chris Rufo is a think tank activist. He's a Republican Party activist who's been very much engaged in the higher education space. In fact, he was the person, more than anybody else, that made critical race theory a big thing in Republican circles. He has an agenda for higher education. The agenda is up there. It includes mobilization of the Department of Justice to investigate elite universities, especially for admissions procedures that violate the Supreme Court's decision on affirmative action. Efforts to penalize universities where DOJ finds free expression is curtailed by social justice priorities. So they want to eat into endowments, penalize them in various ways. He wants to pressure universities to close departments that he doesn't like, that he feels have been captured by the left, especially ethnic studies and gender studies. They want to advance hiring procedures that emphasize the importance of, quote, multiplicity of perspectives, ideological diversity, rather than what they see now, which is a political homogeneity, and terminate diversity, equity, and inclusion offices. So that's Chris Rufo. And Chris Rufo has had a big influence. Trump heard him on Fox News and talking about critical race theory and diversity trainings, and almost immediately thereafter issued an executive order to end diversity trainings in the federal government. So Chris Rufo got a hearing in the highest places. Now, the federal government has a very big stick over universities. So if any of the agenda that I'm going to talk about is adopted, there's a way to really hurt universities, because the federal government is a huge benefactor of universities. As you can see, and I thank Joel for catching a typo here, $111 billion in financial aid. If you get financial aid stripped away from a particular university that the federal government doesn't like, that university's in trouble, because the students are no longer eligible for Pell Grants and other kinds of financial aid. Research funding, $54 billion, so that's huge. About half of the basic research in the United States is done by university researchers. So this is no nonsense. Like, if they were really serious about doing some of the things that Chris Rufo wants to do and others want to do, they can make universities hurt in both of these two domains. And I guess you have to think, what's that going to do to American society? Pull up the ladders of social mobility, hurt technological development, economic development. I mean, to me, it's like shooting yourself in the foot, but nevertheless, this is on the table. So we have the foundations are a seedbed for policy ideas. And I mentioned the three that have been most prominent in higher education are Heritage, Manhattan, and Goldwater. Here are some of their ideas. So these are another set of ideas that are circulating in Washington. The university endowments are already taxed. They weren't for many years, but under Trump they were taxed. They want to increase that tax on university endowments. There's talk about restricting international collaborations, maybe not so good for the development of science and technology, reducing regulations on for-profits, reducing the size of the system by cutting back on financial aid, and redirecting Pell Grants, and this has got some bipartisan support actually, redirecting some Pell Grants to apprenticeships and vocational technical institutes and away from colleges and universities. And then we'll hear more about this. They want to reform the accreditation process. So every university has to go through reaccreditation every 5 years, and they have to meet certain standards. They want to embed a bunch of new standards for universities to meet in order to advance the Republican agenda. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I want to say just what helps to sell these ideas. And I think all of you probably know that we're in an era of populist rhetoric in the Republican Party. And I've just drawn this quote from Project 2025. And you can see how this can can stoke people's resentments. Like, there's this elite up there. They don't care about people like you. And That elite is partly composed of university presidents and professors. So this quote says, today, if you can't see it, nearly every top-tier U.S. university president or Wall Street, and they also say Wall Street hedge fund manager, I don't know why they say that, but anyway, has more in common with a socialist European head of state than with the parents of a high school football, at a high school football game, in Waco, Texas. Many elites' entire identity, it seems, is wrapped up with their sense of superiority over those people. That's kind of the message. They're against you, and you are the fount of wisdom. You're unhappy with these elites. So, one of the very peculiar things about the Republican agenda is that they want to attack the most prestigious universities first. They want to cut them down to size. And he has even said, this is Rufo, his goal is to relentlessly degrade the status and prestige of elite universities. These are universities that have produced cures for cancer, gene editing technologies, quantum computing, AI, lots of other tremendous developments happen at these universities, but this is the target. And some of you may remember the anti-Semitism meetings where the university presidents were grilled. All of those university presidents were from Ivy League institutions. So that's the main target. And Jim Banks, who's the head of the Republican Study Group, congressman from Indiana, our goal is to defund elite institutions by cracking down on their student loans, taxing their endowments, forcing their administrations to actually conduct civil rights investigations. So this is, it's interesting, but it's consistent with the populist mood in the Republican Party. So let's talk about some of the accreditation reforms that they'd like to see happen. Regional accreditors, as I said, they have to reaccredit every college and university every 5 years. I went through this when I was in the UCR administration. It's a lot of work. They don't like certain aspects of universities, and they want to use the accreditation process to get rid of those aspects they don't like. So Ron DeSantis, for example, says, under our new accreditation system, we aren't going to accredit you if you do DEI, in other words, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Virginia Fox, who's probably the leading voice in the Republican Party on higher ed, wants to prioritize measures of student achievement, that's okay, but also post-college employment measures and whether students are paying back their loans. That sounds okay, but that is going to have a very negative impact if it was institutionalized on certain disciplines in the humanities and the softer social sciences for sure, because those are the remunerative value of those disciplines is not as high. And then Donald Trump, he wants to institute a requirement that universities teach the American tradition and Western civilization, and unless students learn about that, they won't accredit the university. So, we do live in a global world, and America's part of that, and I think it's great if people know about American history and Western civilization, but that's trying to tip the scales in a particular direction in terms of curriculum. So that's some of the ideas about accreditation. Trump, like I said, some of his ideas are kind of wacky. He wants to have the so-called American Academy, which is a free online, you can go for free and get an education that's fully accredited with a degree for free. Some of you may remember Trump University, which built consumers for $25 million, I think it was. So who knows what that's going to be like, but it's not going to happen because it's just way too expensive and he doesn't have a way to pay for it. But this is part of his agenda. The other things that he wants to do is reduce funding for science agencies, get rid of the National Institutes of National Endowment for the Humanities, National Endowment for the Arts. He tried to do that. Many Republicans have tried to do that, and they've always failed. He tried to do it in his first administration, failed. And even some Republicans don't like the idea of these agencies either being cut. He also wants to get rid of the Department of Education. So cut places that, actually Congress has added funds to the science agency. So I think good luck with that. But you can kind of see what his thinking is. Reduce, change direction, create competition in this online space. So I have a slide here about the American tradition. It's not clear what the American tradition is. Progressives have one view of this, which is that it includes the injustices that people of color and women experienced over a long period of American history, along with all of the great things that have happened in American history. Conservatives believe they're defending the American tradition by celebrating the achievements in science, technology, global commerce, and celebrating the Western and Christian cultural heritage. But other people say there's a lot of religious heritages in the United States, and why would we want to just focus on one? So, depending on how this is interpreted, and of course, if it is actually institutionalized, this could make academic knowledge subject to political censorship. And I'm always very leery of the state trying to embed itself into the curriculum because most politicians actually don't know that much about science and humanities and social science, but they think they do, and they're not the right people. If there needs to be changes made, and there probably might need to be some changes made, it needs to be up to academics who are actually specialists in these areas of knowledge to make those changes and to fight for them. And that's my view. A little editorializing. Okay, so we're getting close to the end, and then we'll get some questions, I hope. There was very recently, the first congressional salvo, I call it, in this war to redirect higher education, to overhaul it, as I said in the title slide. This is the so-called End Woke Higher Education Act. The House passed it on party line vote. 4 Democrats favored it. It's going nowhere in the Senate, but it could be revived. Some of the features of this act I note here: creditors cannot coerce or compel institutions to adopt any specific political or ideological position. I don't think they do that now. Public institutions may not use a political litmus test for admissions, hiring, or promotion. That means no diversity statements. Institutions must follow narrowly tailored time, place, and manner rules for the regulation of speech. Schools must disclose their speech policies to the Department of Education, and access to financial aid funds can be cut off for institutions that do not comply with this set of new regulations. Okay, so they're thinking about, penalties that are going to hurt. Again, for the time being, this is dead in the water, but it could be revived. So will any of this come to pass? This is a picture of me and my wife with somebody that you may recognize at an Orange County fundraiser. That's Hakeem Jeffries. So, you know, some actions can be taken by executive order. The president can direct executive staff to do things or to stop doing things, and that's why they changed the trainings in the federal government under Trump. And then Biden reintroduced them. So executive orders are a thing where you can, you know, Biden put more border agents on the border because they're part of the executive government, right? So that's what executive orders are for. More things beyond this, like changes in accreditation, is probably going to take reforming the Higher Education Act of 1965. And that's a big haul to do that. So you'd have to have Congress involved in that. If the GOP controls Congress and the presidency, which is, you know, not likely but could happen, then many of the things that I've talked about tonight are on the table. And so what's the odds now according to Las Vegas? Last time I looked, Trump was 45% and Harris was 55%. This is Las Vegas, who knows really, but I always feel like Las Vegas is better than the polls because people are putting their money behind it. The Senate is probably a lost cause. Don't give up hope, but probably a lost cause for Democrats at this point. But the House, according to Las Vegas, 60% chance of controlling the House. To prevent this agenda and many other things that the Republicans would like to do outside of higher education, it's going to be very important to, if we don't win the presidency, and I'll say we because I am also a Democrat, and I can't say that to my class, but I can say it to you. If we don't, then have to control one of the houses of Congress. It's essential, because if they control all three, there's going to be bad news, not just in higher education, but in a lot of other areas as well. So, last couple of slides, I don't want to forget about the states, because we are in a federalist system. The federal government isn't the only game in town. The states have a lot of control. And 8 states now have passed so-called divisive concepts bills that specify that universities cannot allow teaching that argues for the inherent superiority or inferiority of any race, gender, or other group. So that sounds okay to me, but actually what it means is, like, you can't say there was at one point in time in American history white supremacy or male dominance. That would be possibly against the law in those 8 states. 8 states have also passed laws that restrict or ban DEI offices, and which are meant to have inclusive campuses. I think sometimes they go off the rails, but the idea is basically to try to be inclusive of everyone, including groups that haven't had a long history in higher education. And 16 states, including a number of democratically controlled states, now have no longer require BA degrees for many state jobs. And we can argue about whether that's a good idea or not. But it does give you a sense that the public appetite for continued expansion of higher education certainly isn't there at the moment. And actually, Wes Moore and Josh Shapiro, 2 Democratic governors, were among the first to adopt this particular rule. And the states, the thing is, we have like everybody knows, it's a very polarized country, but it's shockingly so in the states. There is not a single state that has divided state legislature. So if you're in a blue state, both the House and the Senate are Democratic. If you're in a red state, both the House and the Senate are Republican. And these are the red states and the blue states. And that's a kind of a dangerous situation in a way, because if you get extreme ideas, you just need people to carry the bill, and no matter what the other side says, you have the votes to pass it. And so and then of course there are some Democratic governors in Republican states, so you need a veto-proof majority if you do happen to have a Democratic governor. So the very last slide, what happens if Harris wins? She hasn't emphasized higher education policy particularly, but she did very recently say that she thinks that there should be alternative pathways to college degrees, and then so she's joining this kind of chorus that we have developing about that. And then you might expect a lot of continuities with the Biden administration, pushing student loan forgiveness, about which I've got doubts, support for HBCUs, support for efforts to make college more accessible, funding increases for science agencies. Those kinds of things have been consistent with the Biden administration policy and likely to continue under a Harris administration if she has a receptive Congress. Okay, that's it. Thank you so much, and I'll look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Got a bunch of questions. This is obviously a topic that has excited some interest. Lots of these right-wing so-called reforms still generate First Amendment-based lawsuits, i.e. content-based discrimination. Do you agree that that'll make SCOTUS appointments important?
Yeah, okay. Should I answer
Yeah.
here? Yeah, SCOTUS appointments are important for a lot of reasons, not only that one. So Florida passed a law that you could not teach certain subjects in general education. That was the so-called Stop Woke Act, HR House Bill 7 in Florida. And it was enjoined by a federal judge because of academic freedom issues. And so right now it's in limbo. Many of these divisive concept laws are not, they're much vaguer, and they will probably pass court review because they don't proscribe anything. They just say you can't compel something. There's a difference there. So whether they're struck down by the courts, there are lawsuits pending now, but they have a better chance of getting through because they're not saying you can't teach something, you just can't compel a certain belief, and that's a little different. So yeah, the organization that I am on the board of, called the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, or FIRE, is fighting a lot of these kind of laws, and they're doing a pretty good job, I think. But we'll see.
What response to this political agenda do you see among your students?
I haven't asked them. So I don't teach really very much about higher education, and so these issues don't come up in class. It's a good question. I mean, most of the students on the Riverside campus anyway are kind of liberal, so they would probably be applauding to the opposition, but there's a healthy number of conservatives too. I don't know. I really don't know the answer.
If research funding is removed from state colleges and universities, what is the near-term and long-term effect on business and the economy? What's the business case?
So, a huge amount of applied research is done in corporations. And corporations also do a fair amount of basic research too. Government agencies, like Joel worked in a government agency, I know, and they do a lot of research too. So it wouldn't take the carpet out completely, but universities do, they're part of a system, which includes government agencies and corporations, collaborations with researchers around the country and indeed around the world. And so obviously it's going to be harmful. How harmful it's going to be, whether other entities can pick up. The thing about universities, they have longer time frames than you have in corporations. So if you can do research that takes longer, to culminate, and you can do more basic research, look at the basic processes behind what's happening in the world. And so it's definitely going to be crippling. How crippling is hard to say, but we're the leading power in science and technology along with China, and that's something you probably don't want to give up easily.
That fits into this next question. Great talk, thanks. As someone who does comparative research, can you tell us, in other Western countries, is higher education also under populist attack, and is that a uniquely American problem?
Internationally, the countries that tend to be most opposed to higher education are authoritarian regimes. There are some exceptions, like China. China is not opposed to higher education. They're expanding it. But a lot of authoritarian regimes are, because they don't like free thinking. They don't see the value of the humanities and social sciences. They want to put all of the emphasis on engineering and science. They don't like dissidents, and they're university professors. There are dissidents on the university faculty. So in general, where you have the tax on higher education tend to be in places like Turkey, Hungary, more authoritarian kinds of places. But we've also found that this is different, but we've also found that there's been declining enrollments in some liberal democracies, not just the United States. There are declining enrollments in the United States, but they're from very high ceilings. So, but a few other places like Canada and Britain and Germany also have somewhat declining what they call tertiary level or higher education enrollments. Not by a lot, but a little bit, but not those kinds of attacks that we see in authoritarian places on the kind of the substance of what goes on in the university.
Two related questions here about Chris Rufo. Where did Rufo go to school? Does he have an axe to grind with the elite schools? And Rufo, it's frightening how much power one man can have to influence policies and attitudes. Can this be curtailed? Where are the checks and balances?
The thing that people don't appreciate is that it's not an individual so much as there's this whole organizational ecology around policy making. And, you've got the think tanks, and it's true that Rufo is influential think tanker, but there are a bunch of other people in think tanks that are working on this stuff. There's ALEC, which is the, what is it called? American Legislative Exchange Council, which brings together legislators and corporate people and think tankers. There's the party people, and they're interacting with each other. So the checks and balances are in the other party, really, and in the American people. Because, once you start getting traction, which they have gotten traction, I showed you the public opinion data, when they have some traction, they're not going to pull back. So it's not up to them to pull back, it's up to people who don't like it to fight back, really. Chris Rufo is a good question. I don't know where he went. I know he's from Seattle. I don't know where he went to college, and I don't know whether he has a particular bug about elite institutions. He clearly has a bug about elite institutions, whether it's because of bad experiences or not, I can't say. Georgetown? Somebody say Georgetown?
Isn't it true that there should be more access to vocational training and apprenticeships? College is not for everyone.
Yeah, college is not for everyone. I feel kind of ambivalently about it. I think that your mobility chances are much greater if you have a baccalaureate degree. You earn a lot more over the course of your lifetime. There's strong correlations with things like voting, reading, volunteering, having stable families, just not getting into trouble with the law. There are all kinds of things that are correlated with having a college degree. On the other hand, I see a lot of students, not just at my university, all across the country who are, there's probably a quarter of them are not really doing any reading or not much, and they're not taking advantage of the opportunities that they have. And if there was a way to help them take advantage of those opportunities, I'd be all for it. If they're really in the wrong place and they should be doing something else and studying trade, that's reasonable as far as I'm concerned. But there are mobility costs, and there are long-term income costs, and there's all these other social costs too, to moving far away from the higher education system and redirecting people to VOTEC.
Has this conservative populist tyranny over higher education existed in any other time in history?
Well, up until the 1950s, only about 5% of people went to college. So, we have a mass system now where, over 50% of high school graduates go on to try to get either an associate degree or a baccalaureate degree. So, and it's probably higher than that. So it's apples and oranges. Higher education has never been a mass system until the 1970s, and it's kind of hard to compare. But tyranny, there was a time in the United States that there were no blacks in higher education and very few women. So, I guess you could call that a tyranny, right?
Is there legal support to protect diversity in gender studies?
Well, again, the blue states are California's a great example of this, are pretty dug in on diversity, gender studies, and ethnic studies. This is a red state phenomenon, really, at the moment, unless the federal government gets involved, which could happen if they're able to change accreditation. But right now, this is a red state, blue state issue, and they are definitely pulling back from diversity, equity, and inclusion in a lot of red states. And we'll see how that works out. You might see a lot of students leaving those states, or maybe more conservative students moving into those states. It's going to be an interesting to see. But right now, it's completely based on the political composition of the state.
The difficulty of defining standards and rules and regs and laws will raise a void for vagueness, legal attacks. Isn't that right?
I'm not sure. I'm not exactly sure. Maybe you could.
Yeah, you can't define a standard. Doesn't that open the door to lawsuits based on the void for vagueness concept?
Yes.
Both on
Okay,
its
I get
face
it.
and as applied.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. Yes, it does. And that's precisely the problem. Like, what is not compelling a belief? You know, if some student feels like they heard a belief that they felt was compelled, and you're in a state where that's not legal, and you can complain, it's such a vague thing that anybody, you know, who feels a certain way could complain and could get some governmental action because of that. So I do think the vagueness is an issue, yeah.
If Trump wins, he will claim a mandate for his policies. There will be some validation of this claim because he won the election. How do you address this?
Well, this is why I said it's important to at least have one a branch of Congress, because if they control all three, it's really curtains. It's not going to be a good scene, and it might not be a good scene anyway. But yeah, of course, he'll say it's a mandate. Every president says it's a mandate. That includes Democratic presidents who win by air, because they want to govern and they want to pursue policy. And, you know, we do, whatever else you can say about him, he is a very determined person. So he will claim a mandate, there's no doubt about it. There's got to be pushback from civil society and from the Democratic Party.
If you'll permit me a question myself, I used to give away your money, and the way we did it, this was for scientific research, we had scholars and scientists who were the experts in their field judge applications for the money. In Project 2025, most of that kind of process would disappear, and the money would be given to the governors in what are called block grants. So the governors would decide who gets research money. Do you see any problems with this?
Guess the answer. Yes, I do.
I think we'll end on a joke question. Will J.D. Vance return his law degree from Yale and all, and all the other hypocrites?
J.D. Vance said universities are the enemy, professors are the enemy, so maybe he should return it, right? Okay, thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Brint. I'm sure we all learned a lot, and obviously from the number of people in this room that went to college, I think we all want to make sure that higher education in this country remains strong. That said, though, as a high school teacher, there are too many kids being pushed to go to college, okay? And VOTEC is really important. So, and as long as the unions are strong and people with trades like electricians and plumbers, et cetera, carpenters can make a good living, then there's nothing wrong with not going to college. That's my opinion. Thank you.